Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm here with a disgruntled Miss Lucy to say hello and welcome to the second half of 2026. Alright, well everyone say hi to Lucy and pay the tax before I put her down and let her get on with her day. As I'm filming this, we are now finishing up with June, which means we are entering the back end of 2026, the ass end of 2026, and somehow, despite the never-ending onslaught of horrors and atrocities and just nightmares that we wake up to day after day, we have somehow survived the first half of 2026, despite what has been an insanely frustrating and horrifying and traumatic, and I don't mean that word lightly, like truly traumatic 6 months. I am so glad to have had a few rays of light in my life, and this channel has been one of them, having a place to talk about things that I enjoy, to do something that is for me. I mean, obviously I'm putting this video out hoping that people will watch and people will enjoy, but I'm doing it for me, right? To be able to have time for myself, to be able to think about the things that I'm reading and things that I enjoy, and to feel like I have a space and a place that is dedicated to my interests. That has been such a balm in what has been otherwise a really, really difficult year. And for all of you who have also struggled and are struggling through all the fucking things that are happening in the world, and if you're in the United States, everything that is happening in this country, I see you. I am holding you close to my heart and praying that if we fight through this tooth and nail, we will see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that will be a world in which we are no longer living in this fascist capitalist hellscape. But until then, I'm going to continue reading my books, and today we are here so that I can tell you about the best and worst books that I have read so far in 2026. This is not going to be the mid-year book tag. This is not where I go through and answer those questions. I don't remember what they're like what's your favorite sequel, or what's your favorite release you've read this year. This is not that. I'm going to do that video. I'll try to film it so that it releases pretty soon after this, but this is just going to be a video where I'm going to go month by month and highlight my favorite book and my least favorite book. Knowing me, I'm so bad at picking like one favorite, so I'll probably just tell you like the best books that I read that month and the books that disappointed me the most, and we'll just go through from January all the way to June. Technically, when I'm filming this, I am still in June and I haven't read all the books that I'm hoping to read this month, but I feel pretty confident that the book that I would have chosen anyway as my favorite is one that I've already read, so we'll just go with that and I think it'll be fine. Lastly, before I get started, I just want to show off this shirt. I went to the Red Hawk Council Raritan Valley powwow. So I went to a local powwow and I got this shirt from a vendor who works with a bunch of indigenous women, like a group of indigenous women, to make these handmade, hand-woven shirts, and it is so beautiful and so comfortable and I'm so afraid of like snagging in on something, but I love it so much, so I just wanted to show it off, and I will link their website in the description, or like put it on the screen so you can see. So if you're interested in purchasing something from them and having a beautiful piece of clothing that is hand woven, hand embroidered, handmade by some indigenous women, then definitely check out the link wherever I end up throwing it up. Before I get into the specific books, I just want to read some of the stats that I have for the books that I've read so far. So my goal for 2026 was to read 50 books, and so far at the time of filming this, I have read 83. And my prediction is that by the time that June is over, I will have actually finished 86 books. So I'm going to say that June, halfway through, I have hit 86 books, which means I have well surpassed my goal of 50 books. And I don't have an updated goal. I'm just going to read however many books I end up reading. In terms of genres, my most read genre is literary fiction so far with 28 books. Second is fantasy with 23. Then I have 18 historical fiction, 17 short stories or novellas, and 11 LGBTQ plus books. My average rating is 3.7, which is actually really good. I'm a pretty critical reader, and a lot of the books that I read end up being like 3.5 stars. So the fact that my most used rating for this year is actually 4 stars means I'm having an incredible reading year. I don't give out that many 4-star ratings. That's like a book I really love. I think I have 5 5-star ratings so far, and I can't remember off the top of my head which ones they are, but I'm sure I'll end up talking about that. In case any of you are concerned, I am not drinking Windex. I am not drinking car coolant. This is blue lemonade that my friend bought and left at my house, so I'm trying to drink it, but it is bizarre. I don't know. That's not a color I want to drink. That freaks me out a little bit. Let's start with the first month of the year, January. As I go through all these books, I'm not going to get too in-depth with any of them. I'm just going to give you a brief overview and let you know, hopefully succinctly, what I loved, and for the books I didn't like what disappointed me about them. If you want my full thoughts, then I have monthly wrap-up videos where I go into each of the books in much more depth, so I will link them in the little card or in the description, so you can go check those out if you want to hear more about them, but I'm going to try to keep it brief for this video. For January, I want to talk about 2 books that I loved and 2 books that were big disappointments for me. And the first book that I loved is actually the first book that I read this year. So I kicked off 2026 really strong with A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. I have the book right here, but it is like I have other books stacked on top of it, so I'm not going to pull it down. But right here is A Drop of Corruption, and right here is the first book in the series, The Tainted Cup. So Tainted Cup, Drop of Corruption. So A Drop of Corruption is book 2 in the Shadow of the Leviathan series, which is how to describe this book and this world. It's like a fantasy biopunk Sherlock Holmes Attack on Titan mashup with a murder mystery, and both of the books in the series are excellent, but A Drop of Corruption is my personal favorite. I gave this book, I think, 4.75 stars. Yeah, 4.75 stars, I'm pretty sure. A Drop of Corruption and A Tainted Cup take place in this world where there are these giant sea monster creatures called Leviathans, and every year during a season they come to shore, and so the people have built these giant walls in a very Attack on Titan-esque or even Pacific Rim kind of vibe, where these giant walls that are meant to keep these monsters, these creatures, off of land. But what they also do, the people in this world use Leviathan blood to create these genetically altered individuals who have specific powers. And one of those individuals is one of our main characters, Din, who has been altered with Leviathan blood so that he has a perfect memory. And not just like a photographic memory, but he is able to do things like replicate the tone and cadence and accent of a person's voice from a conversation that he heard. So he can remember things perfectly. And this helps him a lot because he is the assistant to a very eccentric, blindfolded detective named Anna, and the two of them work together to solve these bizarre, seemingly unsolvable mysteries. Both of the books in these series are so incredible. The world building is really cool, even though it's not necessarily the point of the books. It definitely makes you want to know more, and both of the main characters, Anna and Din, are so freaking fun. Their dialogue is hilarious. They have a sort of like a bickering kind of relationship, and their dialogue is hilarious. I laugh out loud all the time at Anna. She is a fucking riot. And in the second book, you learn a bit more about the world, a bit more about Anna's background, which is like super, super intriguing. The mysteries are really well done. I feel like they're very intentionally unraveled. There's this really beautiful, eerie quality to the world and these people. There were moments where I was reading this book and I truly I got goosebumps because I was like, ooh, that is so creepy and I love it. The second book only released last year, I'm pretty sure, and if I'm not crazy, I think the third book is coming out this fall, in which case I don't know what the author is drinking to power fueling out these books at this rate, but thank God, because they are so fun and so good, and I have so many questions that I want answered in the third book, so I will absolutely just be getting my grubby little fingers on that book as soon as it comes out. But I would highly recommend A Drop of Corruption, but obviously read A Tainted Taint. That's a different book in a completely different genre, but if you are interested, read A Tainted Cup first and then read A Drop of Corruption. And like I said, A Drop of Corruption is my personal favorite, so if you like A Tainted Cup, you have something even better to look forward to. The second book I want to talk about from January that I absolutely freaking loved is A Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, and I have it right here. It is right here. Actually, I'll pull it out. I'll show you. Here you go. Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez with a bajillion tabs because I love this book so freaking much. This is a beautiful story. This is an epic fantasy about 2 young men who are basically trying to smuggle a fallen goddess across this bizarre magical land with these giant telepathic talking turtles. Throughout all of that, you have this incredibly chaotic and disorienting narrative structure where on the same page you jump from first to second to third person point of view, and you're going through different people's perspectives without any sort of demarcation or notice that you've changed perspective. And at first, for sure, at least for like the first quarter of the book for me, I had a hard time following that for a bit, but I beg you to push through because you do get into the rhythm of it and it makes sense romance. And it's an interesting setup also because it's a story nested in a story, nested in a story, because you have the tale of the two young men, but then you also have that story being played out on a stage, and then you also have someone being told this story. It's a very bizarre scenario that's hard for me to describe, but let me just tell you, it is beautiful. It is beautiful. It is so sensory, and it's written in this almost dream-like, fable-like, hazy and lush quality, and I had such a great time. I can definitely see that this might not be a book that everyone loves because, again, it is not straightforward. It is a bit disorienting in both the narrative structure and in the way that the story is delivered. All of it can be a little hard to understand at first, but if you're down for something like that, I promise you it is such a good time. It is so beautiful, and it is also a queer story, so I loved it. I'm pretty sure I gave A Spirit Cuts Through Water 4.5 stars, mostly because it did take me a minute to get into the story and understand what's happening. And I definitely think that the last 25% of the book is the strongest. So while I enjoyed the book all the way through, I didn't fall completely head over heels in love with the book until the last quarter. So for that, I gave it a 4.5 star, I think. All right, 2 books in January that did nothing to improve my mental health. These books I had to struggle through, and I don't have them because, well, one I sold and one I took out from the library. But if I don't like a book, I don't keep it. Let's start with If We Were Villains. This is a book that I had very high hopes for because I saw it on pretty much everyone's dark academia recommendation list. And there's so many people whose recommendations I generally vibe with or I think work for me that had recommended this book, and I read this and I really did not like it. This book and I did not get along. This is a dark academia story about a group of students at a theater school, a Shakespearean theater school, and there's a murder that happens amongst them, and I dislike this book for so many reasons, and it had nothing to do with the Shakespeare quotes. I know a lot of people said that that was disorienting. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the atmosphere. I enjoyed the theater school. I enjoyed all of the Shakespearean quotes that were incorporated into the story. What I did not like were three main things. Three main things. The first being there was one character of color in the main cast, and the way that the author characterized this this guy was distasteful at best and racist to me. She characterized him using some really dangerous stereotypes, like he was the drug addict, he was very sexual in sometimes a very predatory way. She described him as having long monkey arms. I just thought that the way that that character was handled was really thoughtless at best. Number two, I thought that the way that eating disorders were included in the story were also very insensitive and thoughtless and didn't need to happen the way that it did. I didn't like that, left a bad taste in my mouth. And number three, I thought that the ending of the story was completely nonsensical. Again, if you want my actual fully explained thoughts, then definitely check out the monthly wrap-up, the January monthly wrap-up, because I'm keeping it pretty short, so I know it might be very confusing. But the ending of the story, which I think was supposed to read as being sort of grand and Shakespearean and even romantic, to me just made no sense. It was nonsensical. I thought that it was there for the drama, but it just didn't make sense in terms of character motivations, implications, what any of those decisions and actions might mean for those characters. None of it actually came together in a way that made sense. So for all of those reasons, I really did not like If We Were Villains. I think I gave this a 1.5 or 1.75. If I was feeling generous, I gave it 2 stars. I can't remember, but I definitely did not enjoy If We Were Villains. Second book from this month that I really did not like was In the Absence of Men by Philippe Besson. This book had me so uncomfortable. I was clenched every which way. I'll keep it very brief for this. I thought that this book was going to be a queer coming of age first love type of story, and I remember so little about this book except for the fact that there was an insanely inappropriate and uncomfortable relationship between a 16-year-old boy and a 40-something-year-old middle-aged writer who had a very strange affection for this boy. It was this 45-year-old man, the way he described himself, the way he talked about the boy, the way he talked to the boy, the way he touched the boy, all of it, I hated it. I hated all of it. I won't give away any spoilers, but I will say that for most of the book, I can focus on anything else other than the deep roiling fear that I was going to be reading a sexual relationship between this 16-year-old boy and this 40-something-year-old man, because it's presented as a friendship. But the way that it was going, I was like, I'm terrified. And it's so strange because I feel like I've heard people talk about this book and no one has mentioned this. So I'm just am I reading into this in a way that no one else is? Am I just too sensitive about this? Really, I don't know. I don't know what it is. If anyone else has read this book and it made them uncomfortable, please let me know. This book, I don't even know what I rated it. I like 1.5, 2, doesn't matter. Really didn't like it. I would not recommend it to anyone unless I wanted them to feel uncomfortable. Let's move along to February. I'll link the February wrap up in whatever corner the little card shows up. The book that I would say that I enjoyed reading the most in February was actually a reread, and that was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know if this is like cheating or whatever because this is a reread, but I don't care. I love this book so much. It has been through so much with me. It is like wavy from being caught in the rain. I have torn the cover. It's like taped back together. But this book is a book that for me feels like such a balm to my soul. And I know that there are some people who don't enjoy this as much because I think that the way that it is described, indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and teachings of plants, you might think that it goes more into the science of plants or into a bit more specifics in terms of the plants that they're talking about, but it's not really that. It is more so an observation of humankind and our relationship to the rest of the natural world. Robin kind of illustrates her thoughts and her reflections on that relationship with each chapter focusing on a different aspect of nature. But it's so beautiful. I think that everyone should at least give this book a chance. It is very much an invitation to think about our relationship with, again, the rest of the natural world, with fauna, with plants, with animals, and just to think about the current relationship we have with our neighbors and with our home, and to imagine a different world and to imagine a different way that we might exist, that we might interact, and have a more reciprocal and loving and generous relationship with the one and only home that we are ever going to be able to call our own. It is a book that for me is at once incredibly heartwarming and encouraging and uplifting, and also just so devastating because through a lot of it she's talking about the way that indigenous cultures and indigenous people used to live, or the type of knowledge that they used to hold and share and use to shape their society, and the way that we have moved so far away from those teachings. But a beautiful book all around. I would highly recommend. It is one that I am going to be rereading, I'm sure, throughout my entire life. If you ever ask me what I would rate this book and I don't say 5 stars, it's a body snatcher. That ain't me. Get out. You're in danger. Another book that I want to shout out that I read in February is The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante, and this is book 2 in the Neapolitan Quartet. I enjoyed the whole quartet, but I read books 3 and 4 in March, and there are other books that I liked more, so I just want to take the chance that I have now in February to highlight the second book in the series, which I really enjoyed. And it's a series that's really hard to describe. It is a quartet that follows the lives and friendship and very fraught and tense and complicated relationship that these two girls have, Lila and Elena. They are childhood friends who know each other from being very, very young. The book follows them through decades of their lives up until they are grandmas, like they're old ladies. If you're looking for intensely character-driven stories about very human, very frustrating, very flawed people who feel very uncomfortably real. Like, I read these books and I got so deep into them that I would surface for air and look around and just, it was an almost disorienting experience to be like, oh, these characters aren't out walking in the world around me. They are fictional characters, and I am so convinced by their humanity. I didn't grow up in that time, and I didn't grow up in Europe, but I was talking to a friend on Instagram, and she was saying how the story is also written so well because it is such a recognizable portrait of a place and a time and a mindset for where this book takes place. So I think if you're a European reader or you are from that area, then this might really hit for you in an even deeper way than it did for me. For my biggest disappointment of February, I'm going to talk about an entire trilogy because all 3 books in this series I had very similar feelings about. That is the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. This was my official foray into grimdark. I've read grimdark books before, but I had heard that Joe Abercrombie is like the king of grimdark, and I hear everyone lauding him whenever they talk about grimdark. So I was like, all right, I'll try this, man. I'll see what this is about. I thought that the series personally was really disappointing for three main reasons. The first being that the majority of the characters, but at least all of the characters in the main cast, they were so predictable and archetypal. Like, they were pulled straight from a catalog of character types that you might find in a classic medieval, like, grimdark story. And that's not to say that writers shouldn't use archetypes. You know, archetypes and tropes are popular for a reason, and people go back to them for a reason. So it's not necessarily that they can't be used at all, or that I hate the use of archetypes, but every single character for me just slotted so clearly into a character type, and I guess because of how much praise this series got, I was expecting to come across something that felt unique or different or stood out. And I guess that part of the disappointment is rooted just in how predictable the characters felt. I was expecting a lot more in terms of originality. Part two is that this trilogy has like the thinnest plot, and I love a character driven story. I literally just talked about the Neapolitan Quartet, which is very character driven. There's not really a plot, but it felt like this story dangled the potential of this big epic fantasy storyline like quest in front of you, but it was like missed. I kept grabbing at different plot points and none of them really materialized or felt like I had a sense of what any of these characters were doing or what their motivations were. I've heard people defend the plotlessness feeling of this story. People recognize it, but they'll defend it by saying, well, it's not meant to be about the plot, it's meant to be about the characters. But again, see point one, because I didn't love the characters in that way, or I found them so predictable, falling back from the lack of a plot onto those characters didn't really feel like a strength to me either. And number three, the third thing about the series that I found really disappointing is that the character arcs were just a circle. For so many of these characters, it was just a circle or a flat line. Please watch my wrap up video because I go into it in much more depth, but there were several of these characters where I felt like we started with them and then we went hundreds of pages later and they basically just ended where they started in terms of character growth or their personality or thematic growth or anything like that. They just ended the same person they started with like very minor tweaks and changes. Was it worth it to read 3 long fantasy books to basically end up where I started? No. Okay, I said there were 3 things, but there's actually 4 things. Because the 4th thing that I actually really hated about this book is the way that it treated its female characters. There are 2 main female characters that you follow through the trilogy. One of them was a gross caricature of an attempt to make a fierce, independent woman that just robbed her of all nuance and softness, and the other was a woman who had so little agency in her life. Like, she starts as a woman with no agency who is living her life by the whims and the dictates of men, and that's pretty much exactly where she ends up. And I just thought that the women in this book, in this whole series, actually they were written pretty poorly. I think I give the series overall 2 stars, and I have heard that people said that Joe Abercrombie received the criticism about his female characters and really thought about it and integrated that into his writing, and so that improves in other books. So I may still give some of his other books a try. That's always refreshing to hear that a male author heard people, especially like, his female readers say, you're not doing justice to your female characters, and taking that to heart and using that to improve his writing. I appreciate that a lot. So I do want to read some of his newer works and see how I feel. So if any of you have recommendations for newer works by his that you think are better, then let me know. I will look into them. Although I can't say I'll be doing it anytime soon because I have 1,000 books on my TBR that I'm more eager to get to than something by Joe Abercrombie, but it's not off the table. I am still interested. All right, moving along, we're hitting my birthday month, March. Once again, the description and the card up here will have links to the full wrap up. But let us start with a book that absolutely devastated me. If I'm not wrong, this might be the first book that made me cry on camera. So, because I'm pretty sure that in the March wrap up when I was talking about this book, I ended up crying, or at least trying very hard not to fully cry. Shuggie, Bain by Douglas Stewart won the Booker Prize in 2020, and for very good reason. This book is a book that you should read if you want your heart ripped into a million, thousand, billion, gajillion pieces and stomped on and then flushed down the toilet. It is a story about a little boy named Shuggie Bain and his family. He has an older sister and an older brother, and his mom who is addicted to alcohol. It's about their lives trying to survive poverty, trying to survive violence, trying to survive their mom's addiction, and trying to help her recover from that. And it is such a difficult and tender and vulnerable and intimate story, and it's really interesting because I had a really hard time getting into it. I think for like the first 50, maybe like 75 pages of this book, I had a really hard time locking in, and there's something about the way that Douglas Stewart writes. He has a very sort of straightforward, unadorned, undecorated kind of writing that for me it's easy for me to kind of tune out of. So for me, it was a bit of a struggle. It was like a stuttering engine trying to get myself locked into this book. But when I locked in, I locked the fuck in. This is a book that asks a lot of really difficult questions, like does neglect or abuse only exist in the absence of love, or can you love and hurt at the same time? What is redeemable or irredeemable? Can you love someone enough that it makes them want to save themselves, or is that just out of your control? There are a lot of really difficult questions that get asked and not necessarily answered, and I just thought this was an incredible book. I would say that, again, if you want to pick it up, maybe be prepared for it to feel pretty slow, or kind of hard to get into in the beginning. But if you stick it out, I think that you will get a really heartbreaking story. And it's even worse because someone told me after the fact, in the comments, that this book is based off of Douglas Stewart's life. And ooh, damn. My second favorite book from March was actually a surprise, and that is The Everlasting by Alexi Harrow. I read this for my first reading vlog for this channel, which was my romantasy reading vlog. It was my attempt to find a 5-star romantasy. This is a romance fantasy about a historian named Owen who ends up traveling back in time to write the story of this legendary lady knight figure from his country called Una Everlasting. It is a story that involves time travel, that involves repeating lives, and it is so beautifully written. I love this story so much. I had notes about it. There are things that I thought that could have been differently, or I thought that weren't the strongest elements, but overall I thought this was an incredible story. And one of my favorite elements of this book is how Una and Owen, their love story and their dynamics and their sexualities and the type of tension that they have with each other, it is so unlike the very heteronormative tropes and relationships and dynamics that you see typically in romantasy. First of all, just starting with the fact that Una is she is the powerful knight, and Owen is this like, you know, he's a historian, and she is bigger than he is, she is stronger than he is, she is faster than he is, and their dynamic, I love it. I thought it was so wonderful. The writing is really, it's very descriptive and lyrical and has this kind of epic quality to it. Again, there are some things I don't think were absolutely perfect about this book. Like, I thought that the delivery of themes in some places was pretty heavy-handed. I thought the pacing was a little awkward in some places. But if you are looking for a romance fantasy book and you are kind of tired of the very typical popular ones that are floating around the internet, then maybe give The Everlasting a chance, because I thought stellar, incredible book. I forgot to say, but Shuggie Bain is a 5-star book for me, and this is a 5-star book. And it is interesting because both of those books are not perfect books, but the impact of the books and the overall experience were so incredible that I gave both of them 5 stars. All right, my biggest disappointment of March, my least favorite book of March, was unfortunately Sea Change. Sea Change by Gina Chung is a story about a Korean woman who is going through it in life. Her boyfriend is going to space, her dad disappeared some years ago, and this octopus that she has a special connection to at the aquarium where she works is being sold. I thought that I would be getting an emotional, introspective, kind of quirky look at the inner life and turmoil of this Korean woman, and I just thought that this book was really boring, unfortunately. It was a book that I never felt like it built to anything or towards anything. I think I described it in my wrap-up video as feeling like one long flat line of a book. There were no peaks to me or ebbs. There was no give and take in terms of tension, and just, it didn't feel like there was any movement to the book. We started, and then we moved through, and then it ended all kind of at the same level for me. I feel bad talking so negatively about books sometimes, especially books written by like marginalized authors, you know, authors from minoritized groups. But yeah, this book just really didn't work for me. I don't have a whole lot else to say about it, but personally, I thought that it was a pretty boring book that didn't feel like it went anywhere. Moving on to April, again, the links are above and below, and I'm gonna try and move a little faster through this because I thought this wasn't gonna take as long as it is, and I've already been recording for longer than I meant to. So I'm gonna try and keep these a little bit shorter. April was actually a really good month. I didn't have any books that I would want to say were my least favorite or big disappointments. There were some that I thought were kind of mid, but there are no books that I hated. So I'm just gonna talk about the books that I really liked in April instead. The first book I want to talk about is The Hounding, which is right here. So The Hounding was a big surprise to me. I read this as one of my reading vlogs, and it was part of a trio of books that I picked up based solely on the covers. I had no idea what the book was about, but I just picked it up because I thought the cover was pretty and I wanted to see if it lived up to my expectations. And I love this book. This is a book about 5 sisters who are living in the, is it the 1800s or like early 1900s, in this little village in England, and they are accused of basically being possessed by the devil or being demonic and starting to change into dogs. It was giving like The Crucible, Scarlet Letter, and it was very much about the power of accusation, the way that stories take on a life of their own. It was about how it is dangerous to be a free and wild girl. It was also very, very much about toxic masculinity and the way that toxic masculinity and the expectations of men and boys and the pressures put on men and boys to act a certain way, the way that that results in a type of poison that affects the lives of not just girls and women, but also boys and men. The book was incredibly atmospheric. I love the writing style. I love the tension that was just sewn from the very first page to the very last. It's an incredible book and it's pretty short. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend you pick this up. I think this is Shinobi Purpose's debut novel. Yeah, it is a debut novel, and I will for sure be picking up anything they put out because I thought this was such a strong debut. I would say that was my favorite book, but I want to give a shout out to three other books that I really enjoyed in April, which were The Reformatory, Bat Eater and Other Names for Corazang, and The Bone People. I have the book somewhere. I'm so sorry, I'm not gonna find them. But Bat Eater and Other Names for Corazang and The Reformatory were two books that I read for my horror reading vlog, and they were so excellent. They are both books that root the stories in moments of historical horror. They're both stories that anchor in stories of racism in history and kind of integrate supernatural elements into the story to up that horror element. Bat Eater and Other Names for Corazang takes place during the peak of COVID and is very much about the racism and hate towards East Asians that was happening during that time. And The Reformatory is a story about a young boy who has the ability to see ghosts or haints, who gets sent to a reformatory school in the South, a little black boy named Robbie. And that is based on a real reformatory schools where children of color were sent and were tortured and abused in really horrific ways. Both incredible emotional horror reads, would highly recommend. And Bone People is a book like none other that I have ever read, and it's a book that I am still kind of grappling with in terms of how I feel about it. This tells a story of three misfits, two who are Maori and one who is an adopted boy. And it is a story about some really messed up people trying to find a sense of found family and community with each other and the things that they go through and do to and for to each other. It's a really difficult read for sure. I would say check your trigger warnings. It is a book very much like Spirit Cuts Through Water, where the narrative structure is crazy. It is a book, I think, in the foreword or intro or whatever, they talk about how the publishers or editors told the author that you it's a cool book, but you can't put a book like this out. People can't read this, or people won't read this, people won't understand this, something along those lines. It's not just like a chill, put this on as an audiobook in the background while you're doing work. You have to be thinking, you have to be engaged, because it is one that, again, it jumps from like different perspectives. You're suddenly in this person's head, but then you're in this other person's head and a different type of point of view. It's a wacky time. I think it's a really strong, powerful, impactful book, but my main hangup was me trying to decide just how redeemable I found these characters and what type of story it was telling. I had a lot of thoughts. Again, you can check them out in the wrap up, but I still want to give a shout out because I thought it was a really unique book, both for being written by a Maori author about Maori people and incorporating Maori culture, but also because it is very experimental. It is very fearless in its structure, and it wasn't afraid to not be understood, I don't think. I forgot to say, but The Hounding, I can't remember what I gave it. I either gave it 4 or 5 stars. Right now in my memory, I think I would give it like 4.5 stars or 5 stars. It was a very strong book. Loved it a lot. All right, we're rounding the corner. Second to last month, May. For my favorite book, I'm going to give a quick shout out to my reread of Circe and Song of Achilles. I have a whole vlog for them, but these are two old favorites that I reread and I absolutely loved both of them. I love both of these books just as much on a reread. They were both 5 stars once again for me. They were even stronger on a reread, I think. But because I had books that I'd read for the first time that I loved just as much, I'm going to just give a quick shout out to Circe and Achilles and spend a bit more time on the new books that I read. I read 2 books in May that I would consider new favorites, and the first of those was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is a nonfiction book written by the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, which is an organization that gives free pro bono legal aid to incarcerated people, particularly people on death row. It's an incredible book about the incarceration system and how unjust the justice system in the United States is, how people on death row are there often for the most ridiculous reasons, what it means to be innocent, if you have to be innocent to be considered worthy of life. There's a lot of really tough complicated questions about ideas of innocence and mercy and redemption and the ability to change and learn incorporated through this book. It is mainly about Bryan Stevenson's work with one man, Walter McMillian, who was a black man that was on death row for a murder he did not commit. There was overwhelming evidence that this man was innocent, and yet he was still put on death row. And so Bryan was working to try to get him free. But aside from that case, Bryan weaves in a lot of different other people that he has worked with, other clients. And it's an incredibly powerful book. It is so devastating. It is so honest and brutal and tender. And even if there are things about this book or Bryan's philosophy about redemption or mercy that I might not necessarily agree with 100%, it was a book that I think is so important for people to read if they want to be good citizens, good neighbors, if you just want to be a compassionate member of the global community, especially if you're American, because this book is very specifically about the American justice system, then I would beg you to read this book, actually. My second new favorite book that I read in May was Shark Heart by Emily Habeck. This was both a surprise and not a surprise. I knew based on the premise of this book that it might be one that might really resonate with me, but I didn't expect to love it quite as much as I did. This is a book about a newlywed couple, Lewis and his new wife, Ren, and shortly after they get married, Lewis is diagnosed with this disease that is going to slowly change him into a great white shark. They live in a world in which these animal mutations, these diseases they're very rare, but they are accepted parts of the medical community. People know that this happens. It's something that they have facilities built for. There's like a response system for these diseases. The whole experience of Lewis changing and Ren trying to support him through it and adjust through it, it is this long extended metaphor for the experience of diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's or even cancer, just these experiences of watching your person or someone that you care about or love slowly change even while they are right in front of you, and having to deal with the anticipatory grief, having to deal with the way that your lives are changing. All of that is so beautifully woven into the story, and I love this book for a lot of reasons. Again, the theme of the book and the premise of the book really resonated with me, but also the writing style is incredibly beautiful. There are passages in this book that I just like still think about. The narrative structure is also really interesting because I'm not sure if you can see, but it's parts of it are written almost like a play, and the other parts are just written as very short chapters, like they're just vignettes or scenes from their lives. This overall structure of the story is also not what I expected. I can't really go into it without giving you too many spoilers. So again, check out the wrap up if you want my full thoughts. But I also love the characters. I think that Lewis and Ren were written with so much color and vividness and tenderness and believability. I just felt so much for both of them and for both of their circumstances. This is a book that made me fall in love with this author, and I will be picking up whatever else she puts out. The weakest books that I read in May were actually a short story collection. It's like a little novella collection that I read called Good Intentions. They're a collection of novellas, novelettes, whatever you want to call them, based around the theme of motherhood. And I'll put some of the covers on the screen, but I just found pretty much all of them to be pretty forgettable, except for one by Angie Kim. That one I actually really liked. The rest of them I thought they were very weak, pretty forgettable, very heavy-handed for a couple of them, so I would not recommend that collection. If you're going to read any of them, read the one by Angie Kim. Finally, moving on to the sixth and last month that I'm going to talk about today, June. I have two favorites that I want to talk about for June, and I don't think that they could be any more different from each other. I love them both so deeply and for very different reasons. The first book I want to talk about is Betty by Tiffany McDaniel, and I don't know how I'm going to talk about this book without crying. The timing of my filming and editing is kind of wonky. It's such that I know my June wrap-up should be out by now, but I'm actually filming this before I have filmed my June wrap-up. So this is the first time I'm actually talking about this on camera, so I'm going to have to try to keep my composure. But if you want to hear my full thoughts, I'm sure in my June wrap-up, which like I said should already be out, I talk about it at length and probably cry, because even just thinking about some of the scenes in this book is making me emotional right now. I'm gonna pull it together. This book is insane. Betty is synonymous with deep emotional devastation. This is a coming of age story about a young girl named Betty who is part Cherokee, and she's growing up in rural Ohio with her family. It's her mom, her dad, and her many siblings, and they are growing up dealing with a lot of different things: poverty, racism, different types of violence. And it is a book that you have to, if you're worried, check the trigger warnings. It is so much about the different pains and traumas that we experience growing up and living in a world, both from people within our own family and from without. And somehow at the same time, it is such a beautiful and hopeful story. The heart of the story is Betty, but the heart of Betty's life is her dad, Landon, who is just a man who loves his family so much, and he is a whew, he is the storyteller, he is the beating heart of their family, and he tells these incredibly beautiful stories about the world and about his Cherokee background and about his culture. And he tries through his words and his stories to weave this hopeful and gentle and miraculous and the world full of possibilities for his children. I fell in love with Landon. I fell in love with Betty's dad so much through this book that it's a really, really hard read. So much, whew, so much pain exists in these pages. But Tiffany McDaniel's writing is so stunning. The prose is sharp, but also soft and so colorful and so emotive and emotional and provocative and poignant. But it is also that much more incredible because this book is actually based on the life of Tiffany McDaniel's mom, Betty. Like, Betty is her mom. And if you go to Tiffany McDaniel's website, she has pictures of her mom, Betty, and her family, Landon, and all the characters that are in this book. And I was scrolling through that website weeping, just thinking about these characters and their lives and the fact that they're based off her mom's life. Woo! Anyway, if you want a really emotional and painful and yet beautiful story about a young girl coming into her own and learning to live in this world with all different kinds of pains and trauma, but also hope, try Betty. Second book I want to talk about that I absolutely loved in June was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is book one in the Monk and the Robot duology, and it's a little novella. I love this book for absolutely different reasons from Betty. This is a cozy sci-fi fantasy, and it is, I think, emblematic of what Becky Chambers does so well and what makes her one of my favorite authors. It is a book so much about what it means to be a person, what it means to be human, what it means to exist and live and find joy in life. And the way that she does that by exploring creatures and beings that are so different from humans, she uses them to illustrate what it means to be human, what it means to be humane. And it's just, she is so good at that. It's part of what I loved about her Wayfarer series is that she reveals to us about the possibilities of what it could be to be a person and to be in community with each other through these life forms and types of aliens who are so very different from us. Immaculate. In this book, we have a tea monk and a robot who basically, over the course of different conversations and a journey that they go on, ask the question, what do humans need in order to feel fulfilled, in order to feel like they're living a life worth living? What does it mean to have value? Do you have to earn value? Do you have to earn rest? All of these questions that I think are so poignant and important, especially for the world that we're living in now and the things that society and the economy and capitalism expect of people that I personally hate. I absolutely hate the system that we're living in. And I think that the fact that Becky Chambers is like, hey, why don't we stop for a second and think about a different way? Like, we don't actually have to live like this. We created these systems as people, and all we have to do is imagine and apply something else, and we could be living happier, gentler, softer, more joyful lives. So Psalm for the Wild Built was absolutely incredible. I also really like the book Prayer for the Crown Child, but I think Psalm for the Wild Built was just like it hit home for me. I forgot to say it again, but Betty was absolutely 5 gabajillion stars. This was also 5 stars. Incredible books. If I had to pick my least favorite reads of June, my biggest disappointment, it would actually once again be a short story collection that I read. This time it was around the theme of like wildlife or animals or animal instinct, things like that. And it was pretty similar to how I felt about the other short story collection I talked about. I thought that they were just kind of mid or not particularly strong. There were some, I think, especially the one by like Stephen Graham Jones that I thought were like okay, but I didn't find any of them that impactful or memorable. Overall, I think I gave this whole collection like 2.5 stars. I think with the strongest one being the one by Stephen Graham Jones, but the overall, this was my biggest disappointment of the month. And just like that, those are my favorites and least favorites, the best and worst that I have read so far in 2026. Honestly, overall, I think I've been having an incredible reading month. I have read some new favorites. I have read so many books that have made me deeply emotional. I am a very critical reader, and it's not very easy to get me up in my feelings in that way. I am thinking a lot of the times as I'm reading, and so to kind of drop me into a headspace where I'm no longer thinking as much and I'm feeling more for the characters and I'm feeling the story, I think that to me is emblematic of a really incredible book, and I've had several reads like that, so I'm not complaining. Yeah, I've had some duds, but that's fine. And this is also very special to me because, like I said, it is the first 6 months of me doing this channel, of me making these videos and carving out this time and space for myself. So I'm very glad to have this place to talk about these things that I love and the way that these books makes me feel and these books make me think. So I appreciate all of you for being here and listening to me talk. I hope that you're having a good time, and I hope that you'll stick around because I have so many more books I want to read and so many more thoughts I will surely have to share. So let me know in the comments your favorite books that you have read so far in 2026, and if you have any books that have been absolute freaking duds, big misses, then let me know what they were so that I can be sure to steer clear of them. But yeah, I definitely want to know how your reading years have been going. If you have any books that you've read that have challenged you or frustrated you or changed you or made you rethink something about your life, then definitely let me know in the comments. I'm pretty sure I did actually already mention this, but I will be doing the actual mid-year book tag. I think I'll probably have that ready for next week, so keep an eye out for that, and I will go through and answer the questions in the book tag challenge. But until then, happy reading. I will see you in the next one. Bye. The shadow of a drop. So shadow of the Leviathan series.